Good afternoon.
Dear colleagues, thank you for responding to our invitation. We will start with a short introductory speech from the President. You will then have opportunities to ask your questions. When asking questions, please introduce yourself and remember to press the green button on the microphone so that you can be heard to record. Mr. President.
Good afternoon, dear journalists and attendees. First, I would like to say that today is such an important, sensitive day in Ukraine. Today, together with representatives of the diplomatic corps, together with the First Lady, we honored our Ukrainian children, the memory of their death due to the war that Russia started in Ukraine, due to the killing of civilians, first of all. And indeed, this is such a very important moment for us of a full-scale invasion. 631 children died specifically from Russian weapons, from strikes, and the consequences of bombing. And hundreds of children since the beginning of the first occupations, another 11 years. And an unspecified number of children, information that we probably do not yet have, an unspecified number of dead children in the temporarily occupied territories. Therefore, Ukraine, we heard parents today, it is simply impossible to watch and listen without tears. They all want an absolutely fair peace so that the war ends, but also justice for their history, for their families, which, unfortunately, they do not have. The young man who spoke is from Kryvyi Rih. With one strike, in Kryvyi Rih, his wife and 3 children were killed specifically by a missile strike. And they all talk about justice, just peace. In any case, everyone wants peace. As soon as possible. But so that evil is punished. And therefore, it is very important that Ukraine does everything to stop Russia, their aviation, their bombing, their potential. 1 minute before our meeting, or rather 5 minutes before our meeting, I awarded, by a secret decree, the soldiers of the Security Service of Ukraine for carrying out an important operation on the territory of the Russian Federation that resulted in the destruction of 41 aircraft. Half of them cannot be restored. Some of them will be restored for years if they are restored. Indeed, a military just goal. I am grateful to them for their service. Where we are after the second meeting in Istanbul. Today, our groups held consultations on the exchange we have agreed on. The Russian side transmitted information that this weekend it will be able to transfer on Saturday and Sunday 500 people, 500 of our military, out of more than 1,000 that we agreed on. That is, we will be ready to exchange on our part, ready to exchange the appropriate amount. So far, we have not received the lists. I think this is important. This time, unlike last Istanbul's, let's say, Istanbul 2, this time Istanbul 2, and now we have agreed. I told this to the minister before the meeting, and the Russians gave their word that they would give us lists in advance. The lists of whom we change are important to us. And we have not yet received the lists again. Again, there are some reasons, but we will still insist that the Ukrainian side receive the lists for exchange. Moreover, it is clear that the Russians will be ready to make the first 2 exchanges on Saturday to Sunday. As for exchange of bodies, I would like to say that we have relevant documents that clearly indicate that Russia has identified 15, maximum 20% of all those that they have. This is according to the documents they have. We will not say where we got these documents from. And our analysis says the same thing. Therefore, they agreed that let's all prepare properly so that there is a clear identification. Because we are not joking with our military and with our fallen, both alive and dead. It is very important that we get the bodies of Ukrainians, not the Russians they want to get rid of. Because we already had an example. And therefore, after the exchange, our position after the exchange, the work of preparing the body exchange will begin. Again, because of technically important things. And we believe that in this order it should be. Because it's not for PR, it's for important things. Bring back your own. As for the ceasefire, in my opinion, in the opinion of all diplomats, analysts, all partners, from the document that we received after the Russians leaked all this to the media space, leaked their document, which they did not hand over to us before the meeting. What was in the media coincides with the document that was received. We have not received a response on our document to date. A document that Ukraine handed over before the meeting, as we all wanted. As the American president communicated with the Russian side, Putin promised Trump that we would receive the document, that they would hand it over directly to the Ukrainian side before the meeting. And a very important point. The American side, President Trump personally, said that even if you transfer, it must be, as he said, doable. An important point is that the document is doable. That's why we really wanted to get the document before the meeting. In my opinion, it coincides after reading the document, and in my opinion, it coincides with what we thought before the meeting, which is the reason for the failure to transfer the document to the meeting. I think this is important. Because the Russians understood that this was an ultimatum, and neither the Ukrainian side would take it, or no one would take it seriously, because there was an ultimatum. That is, this is not a memorandum of understanding. At least a memorandum of understanding, it should be two parties, not just one party demanding something. Therefore, it cannot be called a corresponding memorandum. That is, this is still an ultimatum of the Russian side to us. Okay. In our opinion, in my personal opinion, I believe that they did not give it to us because they understood that if it became public, then Ukraine would have every right not to come to this meeting. Not because we don't want to, but because it is clear that there will be no content of the meeting. That's why they did everything that way. Just, like. Thimble riggers. I can't find this Russian word. That's who. Definitely not about the highest level of diplomacy, or really about people who wanted to escalate and end the war. And that's why they did it. And for what? In order to demonstrate to the United States of America, this is only one content of all their actions, that they are constructive. For what? In order to have a postponement, which depends personally on President Trump. To postpone or not. Imposition of sanctions. That is, this whole game, all this theater, is in order to demonstrate artificial diplomacy, so that Ukraine comes and gives us 1,000 people. And again, not constructively, because there is not even an exchange list yet. As it was the first time. Why the ultimatum? I would just like to end this thought. If the question is about exchange, then I believe, firstly, we had exchanges. Yes, this is a serious exchange. More people. We want this. And this is the result. This is a positive for us. But I believe that the first Istanbul is no different from the second Istanbul. The same ultimatum things that they said out loud at the time, here they presented it all in paper. The same as it was in the first Istanbul. It's the same today on this paper. That is, it is not a doable document. That is, they postpone the maximum sanctions, they are afraid of them. And exchanges can also be made by group leaders by phone, talk through the lists, say that we are ready to change 500, 300, 1000, 2000. This can be done. Teams can work on this. No matter what. Everyone is interested in the exchange of people. Because they have, well, maybe they don't care about people, but nevertheless, there are still families who want to return their own. That is, they are not doing us any favors. They exchange military for military. This means that it was just a demonstration of diplomacy to postpone sanctions. Why is this an ultimatum? You have the document. If you pay attention, I'm just very briefly about some points. First point. Since the document is in Russian, we sent it in different languages, we sent it in Ukrainian and English. We received, here I have, in Russian. International legal recognition of the incorporation of Crimea, LPR, DPR, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions into the Russian Federation, as well as the complete withdrawal of Ukrainian armed forces units and other militarized formations from these territories. That is, the first point, it is the ultimatum as much as possible. It definitely contradicts the Charter of the United Nations, contradicts common sense, contradicts the Constitution of Ukraine. By the way, they know about it. This is immediately the demand for the greatest reward for Putin for this war. And as I said, Putin said it would be doable. That is, they all understand that it is definitely not doable. Even if they want it, it's not doable. Moment. Next, the second point. Okay. Neutrality, here in Russian, neutrality of Ukraine, we assume its refusal to join military alliances or coalitions, as well as a ban on any military activity by a third country on Ukrainian territory, including the deployment of foreign hostile forces, military bases, and military infrastructure. So, just in 2014, when Putin seized Crimea and part of Donbas, Ukraine had a legally defined non-aligned status. And so it's not doable either, and it goes against logic. That is, they captured us, began to capture us at the moment when we had a non-aligned status. Again, there's nothing to talk about. That is, he wants it for what? In order to take advantage of the occupation of our state. Next, about NATO. Why do we have a document to discuss? Because we have clearly written about NATO. In addition to the fact that it is in our constitution, we wrote that this issue depends on the allies, on all members of NATO. This is their goodwill to involve. And for this it is necessary that they have unity in this. In order to invite Ukraine to NATO. And, by the way, in order not to invite us, according to the relevant documents, they also need unity. That is, today we can raise this issue. But in order not to see Ukraine in the future in the alliance, they also need the unity of all voices. This is also a very important point. And then the third point. Termination and refusal to conclude international treaties in the future. It's just a restriction on the sovereignty of any state. Ukraine is no exception. Okay, and this is a violation, in particular, of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties of 1969. And I emphasize once again that the document is being prepared or was prepared by low-level people. We emphasize once again that the team that is conducting a dialogue with the Ukrainian side on the Russian side is not of the same level. Not decision makers, they do not have the relevant knowledge of what is happening both in international law and in Ukrainian legislation. They must have the appropriate knowledge. Next, when they ask us to withdraw from any unions, I commented on alliances, then Russia, which is today in the union, in the CSTO, should withdraw from the CSTO if they talk about mirror steps. Just as they have relevant allied decisions during the war on both Iran and North Korea. Therefore, it looks strange. It looks ultimatum again. Also, I won't respond to every point. The confirmation of Ukraine's status as a state without nuclear and other prohibited potentials, including the prohibition of their use, transit, and deployment. It just looks like spam, to be honest. This document, and it is spam, just a spam, and show that they are doing something. And it looks like their internal, again, inexperienced electorate, because what kind of nuclear weapons are we talking about? Just some kind of political PR. Well, everyone knows that we don't deploy anything, no corresponding weapons. We simply do not have it. And again, I emphasize, unfortunately, you know why we do not have nuclear weapons. Since 1994, in the context of the Budapest Memorandum, we have been a party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Therefore, why demand from us something that we already absolutely understand, our status? Someone needs to remind them. By the way, they need not to spread nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. Since this is an ultimatum, it is absolutely clear what is happening. And further, regarding the armed forces of Ukraine, they mention our armed forces and some military formations, and they talk about the disbandment of Ukrainian nationalist groups, private military companies, and so on. Okay. I want to remind you, firstly, that there are no private formations in the Ukrainian army. If they talk about Azov, we know that it is the National Guard of Ukraine. Okay. Next. If they talk about private armies and formations, we simply do not have them according to our legislation. Although, now I will think about it after the ultimatums. They have Wagners, and they just have. And it's true. And they admit it. These are serious things. They admit that they have private companies, the Wagnerites, which we destroyed. But nevertheless, they still have them in one quantity or another. And so on. I just don't want to talk about all the points. If you want to talk about Russian, everyone knows that we have one state language, Ukrainian. And the fact that they are again worried about the Russian-speaking population looks very strange, because they have destroyed and are massively destroying regions mostly in the east of our country, where most of them were Russian-speaking. Or Ukrainian and Russian-speaking people. Therefore, again, this looks like PR and an ultimatum. Bloody PR on the part of the Russian side. Therefore, in my opinion, I, in principle, conclude, and then let's move on to the questions. In my opinion, it looks like this. They are ready for exchanges because they need it. And we are ready for exchanges, but I consider it worthless to continue diplomatic meetings in Istanbul at a level that does not decide anything further. I think so. In my opinion, exchanges are going on and should go. Russia is not ready for a ceasefire. At least that level of delegation is not ready to solve this. And they believe that this is a matter of leaders. They told us about it themselves. The issue of a ceasefire is on another level. Okay. We propose, and I think that our partners can support us, but we offer the Russians a ceasefire until the leaders meet. This is my personal opinion. First, we are ready to meet. I immediately want there to be no insinuations, a meeting of the choice of Russians. Istanbul, Vatican City, Switzerland. All is available. We offer an appointment from Monday on any day. Why is ceasefire before the leaders' meeting? Because we will meet if there is no understanding, if there is no desire to de-escalate, if there is no desire and no views on how to end it, then the ceasefire will end on the same day. On the part of the Russians, unilaterally. Please. If we see that we can continue the dialogue and are ready for appropriate de-escalation steps, then we will extend the ceasefire with American monitoring, with American guarantees of mediation. I believe that if the Russians do not want a long ceasefire, then our meeting can be starting tomorrow on any day. This means that there will be a ceasefire for a day, 2, 3. They wanted something there for Easter on May 9th. My personal suggestion. All sides will benefit from this if they want the war to end. If President Trump supports such an idea, we would be grateful. President Erdogan, I am sure, will support because during our conversation he said that he would like a meeting of 4. President Erdogan, President Trump, me and Putin. We are ready for such a meeting on any day. That's it.
Colleagues, let's first look at the topics voiced. If you have clarifications, additions, ask your questions, just introduce yourself, please.
Natalia Kushner, ABC News. Volodymyr Alexandrovich, when I read the text of this memorandum, for me it is an extended version of 2022 from the words denazification and demilitarization. Or maybe you have a different impression of it. How do you assess the difference in the demands of Russians in 2022 and 2025? Thanks.
There are almost none. I see some changes in the wording of the same ultimatums. The content and spirit are the same, I think so. There are additional areas where they wanted the physical destruction of the leadership, for example. Here they are talking about the electoral process. I don't see a change in content. Some approaches have been slightly changed. Why? There is little pressure, I think, on the Russian side. For example, conducting operations helps us so that the rhetoric in the United States starts to change, that Ukrainians are losing this war and we don't have tools, cards, etc. Now it sounds a little quieter. I say this very carefully because now our team is in the United States of America and the mood has really changed in political circles. There will be a briefing now. Today there will be a major Senate briefing from our team, Vice Prime Minister Svirodenko and Head of the Office Yermak. Next will be First Deputy Minister of Defense Boev. Next will be my Sanctions Commissioner. And there will also be Palisa, the military advisor. That is, there will be the whole picture of the Senate from sanctions to stolen children, from the situation on the battlefield to special operations. So, we will show everything, and we really hope that the Senate will confirm its intentions and go to the application of sanctions. Because, I want to remind you, in addition to the fact that all sanctions were imposed due to Russia's aggression, And there was even a softening of the conditions for sanctions against Russia, a softening of the conditions for sanctions. And the American side said that if the parties do not agree to a ceasefire, there will be sanctions. We are demonstrating that we are ready, and the Russians are demonstrating that they are not ready for a ceasefire. They demonstrated this is out loud, not behind the scenes of political dialogues, but concretely, openly, they talk about it. Therefore, we insist on sanctions and ask for it.
Ukraine form.
Mr. President, from what you have commented on this memorandum and the preliminary information about it, it shows that this is just a cover-up, not diplomacy. And actually, the Russians themselves also confirm that this is just their cover-up. But why do you think our partners, especially the American ones, do not seem to understand this?
I think someone understands. Someone does not understand. I think Americans, they are smart. I don't think they don't understand. I think some people don't really want to see it, and some people want to and are ready. I think from decisions, and it will be clear from America's decision, how strong they will be, who wants to, who doesn't really want to. That is, the question of political compromises is sometimes somewhere. I understand that someone wants to find a soft policy towards the Russians, not to close or not completely close the door of opportunity. Look, well, but there is a lot of such a house for Russians, in which there are a lot of doors, for them. Why there are a lot of doors for them, and one for Ukrainians who did not attack anyone. And this one door is not very big, And so we want everyone to see, well. Now it's more and more people in the United States of America, I mean the leadership, more and more people are seeing what the Russians want. To postpone by artificial diplomacy without serious decisions. Postpone sanctions in order to conduct offensive operations and occupy Ukrainian territories. That's what they want.
Next, please. PBS. Volodymyr Zelensky, PBS News. Mr. President, you said that your team is now in Washington. They will be briefing from the Senate today.
There have already been meetings with Rubio, with Kellogg, with Witkoff, senators. Today will be there will still be a big event, such a briefing.
But we understand that, in fact, the Senate is already 80% ready. There are enough votes there to introduce these sanctions. There is, in fact, no political will on the part of President Trump. In what way, apart from this briefing with his team, do you have any direct dialogue in order to get this political will to impose sanctions? And if possible, the second question is to clarify what you said. You mentioned that you are proposing ceasefire, which will be under American monitoring and mediation guarantees. Can you tell us a little more about what it should look like?
First of all my conversations with President Trump, they are public. In one form or another. Some conversations' content may not be entirely public, but the meeting or conversation itself, as a fact, is all public. I frankly didn't have any others. Meetings and conversations with American management of another level from the Ukrainian side are constant. And many of them are non-public. Because there are quite a lot of them, and they must bring some result in order to be public. This is the second story. As for sanctions, we understand that the Senate is ready for this. Yesterday we publicly heard the voice of not only senators, we hear congressmen, but we publicly heard the speaker. Mike Johnson, I didn't have a separate contact with him, this is his position. And I am very glad that there is such a position that they are ready to support it. But it is very important that President Trump is ready to support sanctions. His last signals were that he wanted to give the Russians more opportunities. I believe that it is very important for us that the Russian was promised to hand over the doable document. It is not doable. According to the law. Not only my political will. This is very important so that no one later says that Zelensky is difficult to negotiate.